Hey, this is Carrie Olsen, and this particular video is an excerpt from one of my monthly office hours that I have with the Voiceover Success Intensive membership. So if you're interested in being a part of that and attending our next office hours, be sure to check that out. There's all these questions and buzzwords and jargon that come up about audio that can be really scary for voice actors. So I wanted to address some of those in today's call. So these are some questions that came in through the VoiceOver Startup Facebook group and pretty close to each other. My question is, since I don't have much experience recording, any advice on things I can play around with or watch more about getting the sound right in a recording? And then the second one says, how much post-processing do you apply before submitting an audition clip? Is there an industry standard when it comes to a post-processing chain? EQ, compression, limiting, normalization? What specific post-processing combination has given you the richest, fullest, warmest, clearest sounding voice? Thanks so much for your feedback. So this first one, any advice on things I can play around with or watch to learn more about getting the sound right in a recording? When you're first starting voiceover and you get your first coaching session, and most likely your mind is going to be blown in that first coaching session by all of the things that, not just that you didn't know, but the things you didn't know you didn't know. And then the things that you still, even though you're aware of them, you can't really manipulate those things yet because they're not familiar enough. So things like when you're reading conversationally and there are certain things that your coach will pick up on that you're like, well, those two reads sounded the same to me, or I don't get the differentiation because your ear's not quite attuned to it yet. So very similar with recording. So even her question of things I can play around with to learn more about getting the sound, knowing if it sounds right is even pretty difficult for a beginner, because if I played something for you that was really heavily processed, something that was, kind of in the moderately processed, that was raw, as a brand new voiceover talent with no experience with audio engineering, you probably wouldn't be able to point out which was which, or to really understand the nuances. So the first thing is just take your time, listen to a lot of audio, to good sounding audio, things that are already broadcast quality, to try to get your ear more attuned to that. And then also just to not worry too much about you having to get that as far as processing and play around with. There are things you can play around with. There are courses you can take as a voice actor if you want to get more familiar with sound engineering, but that is a completely different job. And thankfully, it's something we don't have to do most of the time, depending on your business. And then the second one, how much post-processing do you do? Uh, the easy answer to that one is none for me. I don't do any post-processing. And then the last part here says to give you the richest, fullest, warmest, clearest sounding voice. I have very strong thoughts on what to do to get the richest, fullest, warming, clearest sounding voice. And that is to practice a lot and to get really good training. I think if you practice and get training, that's the absolute, not just best, but the most reliable way to have a rich, full, warm, clear sounding voice is to establish that, to develop that from the source. That those are things that should, that's why we train, is to get a rich, full, warm, clear sounding voice, as opposed to not having to develop those things and then relying on equipment and processing to do those things for us. So here was one answer. Absolutely little as possible. It's your job to crush the read in a quality space with controlled breathing, and then let the sound engineers do their job. So again, crush the read. So there are two jobs being done: voiceover and audio engineering. You're doing the voiceover piece. So the audio engineering is someone else's job. And of course, like I said before, it depends on the type of business you have. If you are, Sean was on here earlier, if you are doing some production, it's not something you want to try to learn at the same time as you're doing voiceover and then market yourself as an engineer. If you're going to market yourself as an engineer, you have training as an engineer. You shouldn't be guessing. And you also shouldn't just be using presets that someone gave you and then claiming that you're engineering, because it's a very skilled field. So it's not a bad thing to say, I'm quote unquote just the voiceover. There's plenty that we're doing as voice actors. And if you want further study, then absolutely go for it. But don't let it be something that's holding you up or holding you back. So your job is to deliver an amazing voiceover, and you do this by taking responsibility for several things. So the first is have a high quality microphone. That is something that's our responsibility, and that affects the recording quality. I mean, it affects everything. So that's something you have control over. So that should be a concern. And I would definitely address that before I ever thought about doing any type of post processing. Know your mic technique. So if you have a great microphone, but you're way up on it or way too from it, or you have it turned around backwards, which happened before, I can't figure out why this sounds so muffled and why I can't get a clear sound. Oh, the microphone's backwards. That's something that we as, voiceover talent do have control over and should be watching for. Most important thing as far as getting that rich, full sound, have amazing performance skills. And that's something that usually doesn't come on its own. So you want to get training and learn how to develop your ear, and then have a quiet and sound dead place to record. So again, these are the things that we do have control over and that we thinking about and deliver the audio file. So that's pretty much where our responsibility ends as far as the audio quality goes, making sure that you're not being held back by the thought of, well, if I'm not an audio engineer, or all these other voice actors are doing these really cool, sweetening techniques and everything. Um, that it's just not necessary to, I think it can be a distraction to go too far down that audio editing side.